Hello, founders. Welcome to Startups.com. We are live. We come to you every Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. Tuesdays, we do pitch decks. Wednesdays, we do traction hacking, revenue acceleration. And then Thursdays, we do Q&A. We get to have a great conversation. We want to make sure that you always have your questions lined up. Doesn't matter where you're watching this. If you're watching it on the YouTubes, the interwebs, you're watching it with us live at startups.com, feel free to hit the Q&A box, ask your questions, and we are happy to answer them. We collect all the questions and we try to get around to them. And we want you to ask us so we can definitely help you the way we want to go. I have my partner in crime, Will Schroeder here, 9-time funded founder, 5 exits, 30 years in the business. And I'm just going to say that this show is brought to you by us here at Startups.com. If you haven't checked us out, you know the URL, easy to check out, Startups.com. Well, one of the things that a lot of founders and members don't realize is that once you join us, you can book office hours and actually chat with you one-on-one. And I know you had a pretty big slate today. How'd that go?
Today was a marathon. I had probably a dozen back-to-back calls, which, Ed, you do these calls all the time. It's a lot, right? And it was awesome. I just want to give you guys a preview into like what our lives are like here. So I got a dozen people back-to-back, like literally as soon as I hang out with one, the other one's calling in. And every single person has a different challenge, right? We talked to one person, their product was this really, really high-end complex sensor that can detect things that nothing else can detect in all the use cases. Another one was a way to combine a whole bunch of fantasy sports because that's a $60 billion industry.
Whoa, nice.
That has massive amounts of churn, right? And what I'm saying is like the spectrum of problems are massively different. And that, you get to do this too. And the coolest thing is I just get to sit one call after the next and say, cool, let's dig into this problem. Cool, let's dig into this problem. Like if you love sports, this is ESPN, right? But the biggest thing for today specifically, having just gotten off all those calls was the gratitude, right? I mean, all these founders, they're busting their ass, we're trying to help them out and they're so grateful. Like everybody today was so kind and so thankful. And I just got to say, for those of you that are listening, for those of you that are, that may have been on some of those calls, thank you. And by the way, if you're watching these episodes and it's working out for you, drop a comment, subscribe, leave a like. Like it matters to us a lot that this is helping somebody.
Right on. It's perfect because, Will, we have this great balance of helping as many founders as possible. So we do it on a macro level, putting out curriculum. And a lot of founders, rightfully so, they like to lurk and just learn. And then there are those founders that just want to get right in your face, ask you the questions, challenge you. Every day I'm learning and it keeps us on our toes. And that's why we love it, Will. We love talking to founders in that way.
It's so cool. And so again, if you're listening in this, you're watching this video and it's 2 years from when we recorded this video, drop a comment, drop a like, subscribe, etc. And I don't just say that because it's the YouTube thing. I say that because it really does help us understand what people care about. We appreciate the gratitude too. A lot of people think, oh, I'm some random commenter. No, you're not. You're somebody that we want to help. Get in there. Tell us where your head is at. Get on these live broadcasts like our friends do now and then talk to us. It's awesome. So, Ed, with that said, today we're going to answer some questions that we get asked on a regular basis in these conversations. What do we got today?
Will, the first question is, can I get a better outcome by bootstrapping? And a lot of founders come to us and they're trying to raise. And we often talk about the alternative bootstrapping. How about we start off with defining the two paths, like raising from institutional investors and then bootstrapping? What's the difference when you're explaining it?
The first part about it, Ed, is like everybody understands they don't have money, right? So when people come to us and they're like, hey, I'm bootstrapping, I want to raise money. They never say I want to raise money just because I want to have like a big outcome or something, which is what the investors want. They're basically saying there's a ton of stuff I need and I need money to get it and I don't have it. So I want to raise money, okay? If I could say to you, without question, that you'll continue to make money if you hold out long enough, and there's no guarantee, but you'll continue to make money, and you won't have to raise money. By year 3, you'll have all the profit you need to do your own thing. Would you still raise money? Now, most people would actually say no, but they know and feel that like they need all this stuff right now, and if they don't raise money, it'll never happen. And I get that. I also look at it and I say, Ed, there are 1,000 other types of businesses that never think about raising venture capital or anything else like that just go out every day and try to sell the product and try to make some money and have phenomenal outcomes. So while capital raising is great, there's kind of a bootstrapping way is really how like 99% of people build real businesses. So it's not a one-off. Bootstrapping is not a one-off. It kind of is the path. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's the default. And a lot of founders don't recognize that. Like, here's a great example. Microsoft bootstrapped, right? There are companies out there and they raise at the end. Like there's a specific time that they're raising. But a lot of founders, they read these press releases, they read these articles in TechCrunch, and they just think it's the automatic default. It's the only way. And I don't think the startup industry, we've done a real good service to founders in making them think that this is the way it goes. And then what happens, and I think this is really sad, is that founders can become investor obsessed.
Yeah.
And they just do it because they're trying to raise money, and that's just not the way to go. And so you're advocating that there may be a better outcome. There's a better way possibly out there for you about bootstrapping. What does that look like for you?
Okay, so let's talk about what gets taken off the table, Ed, when you raise money. That should be question one as a founder. And let's say you and I are starting. You and I are co-founders on NewCo, okay? And we're thinking about raising money. One of the things I'd present to you as my co-founder, I'd say, man, if we decide to raise money, there are a lot of outcomes that are off the table, right? If we get this business up to $1 million of revenue, but it spits out $400,000 in net income, you and I can both split the $400,000, take home $200K each on $1 million business, okay? And we have maximum flexibility. I'm not saying it's all sunshine and rainbows, but I'm saying $1 million outcome could be incredibly life-changing for us. However, if we go raise money and we get to $1 million and it's throwing off $400,000, we're not going to see any of that, right? We can't just take distributions for the rest of our lives. That has to be reinvested so we can get some magical outcome, which 99% of the time will not happen, right? Just the nature of it. So when I think about, can I get a better outcome? I think the first thing you and I would talk about, Ed, is we have more outcome than we would otherwise get if we raise money. How would you look at it?
Yeah, you bring up a really good point. So the options are there. You don't have options. Not only do you have to reinvest, but then there's the pressure to grow. And what if, Will, you and I, we just really like our lifestyle and it's great. And we get systems set up and it becomes like an annuity type business where you and I are splitting that $400,000. And I just want to just kite surf. I want to roll off into the sunset. I want to go do other things. Well, I want to have that option too. So it's not only business options. Let's say you and I, we get an offer and someone comes in and wants to buy us for, let's say $2.5 million. Let's just, be conservative. And we've done it for like the last 10 years and we've been banking money. Well, for an investor, that's not going to work out. They're looking for, especially VC, a bigger option. And if I want to embrace that lifestyle, well, that option is off the table. So I'm totally hearing what you're saying.
Yeah. And look, the other side of it is we keep thinking that unless we take on investor money, this thing will never be worth something. Worth something to whom? Right?
Exactly.
The argument is, oh, well, we'll have a smaller piece of a bigger pie. First off, that's just an assumption that you would have a bigger pie. The only guarantee is that you now have a smaller piece. like we make that an absolute, and then there might be a bigger pie. But statistically, here's more likely what's going to happen. You and I now own 40% total of the company, right? Because we have option pools and investors and stuff like that. And the company gets to $3 million, maybe $5 million, which isn't a bad outcome for a company. And that's assuming we get any revenue at all. And then it kind of dies there because that was the market opportunity. Now, a lot of people will say, well, hey, if it was going to die at 3 to 5 million, then I wouldn't want to have been part of it anyway. Are you sure? Are you sure? Depending on the business, I've run started multiple companies that were doing $3 million in revenue on $1.5 million net. And I was awfully happy about it. So the idea that it's got to be $100 million to make money is bullshit. Straight up. And I like to have that optionality within bootstrapping. What about you?
And that's the janky math that happens when you look at multiples and you look at the glamorous. And Will, I'm just going to be very transparent. There was a time in my life where that's all I wanted to chase. I did not care about
Me too.
all the options. I wanted to go unicorn. I wanted to wipe that off bucket list. That's where I wanted to work. But, Will, these days, wow, sign me up for what we're talking about. The unit economics just make so little sense. They're so warped at those levels when you're taking in gobs of VC money. And if you just really boil it down to us and what we could do with that money, bootstrapping, very enticing.
Well, look, and there's this idea that if I don't take money, I'm not going to build a big business. Like, why? Why can't you build a big business? The first business that I started, it was an agency. It was professional services. There's nothing exciting about it, right? We never took out a penny of outside capital, and we grew it to $700 million in revenue. Right? Like in 7 years. The idea that you can't do that without capital is just total bullshit. Don't get me wrong. Yes, capital can be an accelerant. It can. And I'm not anti-capital. Hell, we run a capital platform. Right? So, we do this for a living. I'm just saying it ain't the only way. And I think bootstrapping has somehow been given this bum rap that it's like it's for people who can't raise capital. And I'm like, yeah, cool. Sign me up.
Let's get into some of the unit economics that happened on this one. Well, you say this, you say 10K net income per month in a business is worth $1.5 million of cash. Like, break that down in terms of the mentality that founders need to be cognizant of.
Okay. And so I was having this conversation on Reddit of all places yesterday, right? And I And I was getting lambasted for it. Okay. Actually, the funny thing about Reddit, you post something, and Ed, you and I talk about this all the time. If you don't have time to work the comment thread, it's not going to go well for you. Okay.
Oh, Reddit.
And so I posted basically something to that effect. I said, if you have a business that's doing 10K net a month, you would have to otherwise sell a company for $2 million in order to get that same return in the market, the net income on that to return the same in the market. And instantly, everybody jumped all over that. That's a bullshit comparison, because if you just have cash, you're not working there, and the money's just making money. I'm like, of course, right? My point was, it's an asset that is generating money. It wasn't that, and then you don't have to work anymore, nothing like that. Anyway, but the point is, I don't think people realize what the value, like the cash equivalent value of having an asset that throws off 10K is. Awesome. It's awesome. And when you get to that point, in 10K, I use that number because it's like a milestone that people can reasonably get to. But you start increasing that number to 50K, 100K, and then you think about, what would I have to sell this business for in order to generate a return? It's a big ass number because you got to pay taxes and things like that. That was the point I was trying to make, and it's something I think about all the time.
I think about it more and more as, building a portfolio of companies. So many founders don't understand the value of cash flow until it becomes an issue for them, right? And just, how many founders do we know, Will, raised gobs of money, they generate good revenue, but are cash poor, illiquid, can't handle an emergency? It's scary.
It is. So here's what I would say. I say, in general, bootstrapping gives you a ton of optionality, and that optionality actually shrinks geometrically the moment you take on investors. It's not just a matter of capital. The moment you take on investors, the number of outcomes that you can have that will satisfy you drops dramatically. It actually makes your options fewer. Everybody thinks it's the opposite. Well, I'm taking on money, so I now have more options to grow. Maybe, statistically you won't, maybe, and I hope you do, but it takes a lot off the table. I think that's widely overlooked in the bootstrapping realm.
Let's double click on this for a second, Will, because I think what happens is founders go, well, I'd be happy with $100,000 return. Why won't investors be happy? If you understand startup investors, and I'm just going to make it as simple as possible. You have, let's say, $100 million fund. Let's just go out there like that. Immediately, you've got everybody locked in for 5 years, and you're taking 2%. So automatically, $10 million gets lopped off. So now that fund has $90 million to invest. And they go and they have to make 100 bets. 90% of them are going to fail, and only 3, maybe 2 are going to go unicorn outsized returns because they've lost on everything else. Of course, they can't settle for the 1x, 2x return.
Yep.
You got to hit it out of the park. You got to go 10x, 50x, because that's the way VC works. And so it's not apples to apples, it's apples, and they're not even the same fruit, Will. That like founders have to understand this is the incentive system for investors.
Yeah, and you got to know what you're signing up for, right? I mean, like, if you're going into this and you're like, well, hey, this thing's going to make a 2x return, like you're saying, you've got to understand going into this that's fine for us. You and I would be high-fiving to hell, but for investors, they actually just don't have that option. I don't think people see it.
So let's wrap this up. So what would you say for the founders out there that are like, bootstrapping, raising money? How do they make this decision? Like, what would be your first advice to those founders?
The first thing I would say is, what is the probability that you can get this thing to a life-changing amount of income without an investment? Now, a lot of people will say, none. I have to have investment because I have to hire a developer or something like that, or I'll never make it through. And I'll just gently remind them, yeah, but like 99% of people who build companies don't do that. So when they say, oh, that's not true, venture capital and angel investing, I'm like, dude, walk down the street. Look at all of the storefronts. Do you think any of those were venture capital or angel invested? No, they're just people that open up an ad agency. They build their own software and run it as a side hustle until it's something else. All I'm saying is that capital can be helpful, but it's also got a real cost to it. And outside of that, if we were to say, should we do it? I'd say, Ed, can we get this thing to 10K a month? Right, on a regular basis? Because if so, let's try to get it to there. And at that point, decide whether it's worth taking on more capital. But let's do anything we can to get it to that point.
Let me make a suggestion for the founders out there. Run the exercise as if you're never going to raise money.
Yep.
And ask yourself, what would I do? And Will, this is maybe a dirty little secret, but literally that's my default. That's what I do first is if I have an idea, I run the scenario. How would I bootstrap this?
Yep.
And I look at it, and usually I end up with something, man, that's actually pretty good. If I can pull this off, I'm going to enjoy 100% of the spoils of war on that one. And my mind starts to change. And then I don't go through that whole rigmarole of trying to raise capital.
Yep. I agree. All right. What else we got, Ed?
Let's talk about exits, Will.
Oh, okay. This is actually a nice dovetail off the same concept.
We just finished talking about bootstrapping and what that looks like. But let's talk about exits. And defining an exit is you can sell your company in some liquidity event. Maybe someone comes, writes a big check, or you get acqui-hired, or you go public, different things. There are all sorts of things. Well, we are surrounded by stories where it's like, oh, we have public for $1 billion. That's amazing. That's considered like the glorious exit, but exits come in all different shapes and sizes. For you, what do you immediately think when you think about what is the smallest exit that could be life-changing?
Well, I think it's way lower than what most people think. And I'm always fascinated by people's numbers. Here's my concern, my fallacy issue with founders when they think about life-changing money. Let's take exit off the table. Let's just talk about life-changing money in the bank. However you got it, right? You became a doctor, and that's how you got it. Doesn't matter. I have this kind of graded step that I think about. I think about 20K in the bank, 200K in the bank, and 2 million in the bank. And what I think about, okay, is at each of those thresholds, how does my life change, right? What specifically do each of those thresholds fix? Now, again, your numbers might be different. Your numbers might be 50K, 500K, 5 million. It kind of doesn't matter. I'm going to use these numbers because they're relatively small. And I also always try to remind people, this is very much a US-centric thing. People are like, well, in San Francisco, you can't possibly live on. I'm like, dude, you live in one of the smallest major cities there are, right? Like most people do not have your cost base, right? Yeah. Most people don't need $5 million to buy a house. Like it's not the way the entire rest of the world works. Anyway, so 20, 200, 2 million. Here's what happened to me. I'll just talk to myself. When I first had $20,000 in the bank, it was the first time I had a touch of safety. It was the first time in my life that something minor could go wrong, like a car repair, or I lost my job for a month and I'd be okay. And honestly, Ed, that probably covered 80% of the problems that I was likely going to have. I don't think people realize, right, how big of a buffer that is until you don't have it. What was yours?
Let's extrapolate
your first
that out.
Threshold.
Right. Yeah. I would say my first threshold, and it shifts, but it's always been maintained as 3 months of emergency expenses. Yeah. But on top of that, being debt-free and having that in the bank, I cannot state what you said in terms of security, the psychological safety and how much my personal performance, and I wasn't saying yes to everything, like just relax. I was a better person because of it, just having that in the bank. So I totally get it. And I still look at that, proverbial 20K. Now it's a little bigger. I got a mortgage, I got a family, all those things, but it's not much to cover that 80%. Like you said, that gives me so much security. And wow, is it ever a game changer just getting that first level?
This is why I'm tiering it, Ed, because I think what happens if we talk to founders and I say, what's your exit number? It's 10 million. Oh, here we go. Okay, it's 10 million. Why is it 10 million? Because that's enough money where I'd never have to work again. Okay, cool. Sounds awesome. Again, probability that you'll ever get to it is almost zero, but let's take that off the table for a second. If it was 5 million, how difficult would your life be? Oh, I mean, I'd be okay at, 5 million. I just have less money. Okay, but you'd be okay. Yeah. I'd get earning $40,000 a month, blah, 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 right? And I'm like, so why are you optimizing for 10 if 5 would get you there? Because the probability as you increase that number changes dramatically. And this is where the thought process comes in. And I'm gonna expand this a little bit more. Then I say, okay, let's say 5 million was your threshold. If you got to 1 million, I understand you can't retire on that in most parts of the United States, right? However, what would that do from a safety standpoint? What problem could possibly show up if you had $1 million in the bank that you couldn't solve? Here's some examples. You have some massive health issue that you have to have cash for, right? There just aren't a lot of life problems that you can't address with $1 million. Now pause there. If you can address 99% of problems that you'd have to write a check for with $1 million, how is that not life-changing, right? And I just used $1 million. That number's way lower, actually. When I went through this process myself, I went through this process very early in my career. This is like 25 years ago. And I started to really think about this. I started to think about the thresholds of cash because I was early in my career. I started to make some money. And I thought to myself, now that I've got 20K, what can't I do, right? In other words, again, this isn't I have so much money I can do whatever I want. But more specifically, what could go wrong? And I thought, well, it's not going to cover me if I have a major problem, like a major problem, maybe a health issue or something like that. It'll cover me if I break a leg, but if I get into a major car accident and I can't walk anymore, it's not going to help me too much, right? And so I said, well, what's that next threshold? And I just added a zero and I called it 200K. Again, your number might be 500K. And then I thought, how many problems could I possibly have at 200K? I was also 25, that I couldn't write a check for and move on, meaning how bulletproof am I? Ed, when you think about that, safety, being bulletproof, again, this isn't the same as saying I have enough money that I never need to make money again. That is a ridiculous threshold that most people never get to anytime soon. How do you think about that next year, past that 20K?
Well, I lived it, Will. I can tell you a personal story. If I didn't have that 200K, I couldn't go 2 years without a job. Like I hit a major recession. I was unemployable as a founder, all those things. And I needed some time, Will, for soul searching. Not only could that cover, now I live in Canada, so I got a socialist medical system. I just have to wait a long time. But not only can that cover like a big emergency, but in terms of psychological, emotional, if I didn't have that chance to spend those years finding myself, getting my marriage figured out, all that stuff, like I was so grateful that I was able to do that instead of getting stuck in something, totally dead end. So when you say bulletproof, yeah, there are so many things I can think about, like your car breaks down, accidents, something happens with your family. It's life-changing for sure.
Absolutely. And again, this isn't the same as saying I no longer have a need for money. Again, I think that's a dangerous threshold to solely optimize for. What I want founders to do is I want them to have different tiers that they're trying to move up levels like a video game. And I want them to say, okay, I want to get to the 20K tier or 50K, again, whatever your number is. Because once that happens, here is bullet points of what I can withstand. And I think it's important to lay these things out, Ed, because I think what happens is when we're not hyper specific about what something buys us or where our safety comes from, we create what I call paper demons, which are these fake phantoms in our life that haunt us, but they're not actually really a problem, right? So we're like, oh my God, if I lost my job, I'd lose everything. And I'm like, are you sure? Have you run a spreadsheet down to the penny exactly what you would lose? Because the idea isn't you lose your job and you're just incapable of earning income. You can go drive Uber if you had to. You can go to work at Starbucks if you had to. You're going to make something, right? But I take these numbers, these thresholds, and I get hyper specific about what I still don't have at that threshold. What I'm telling you is the first threshold, Ed, probably covers 80% of what most people will run into on a daily basis. That second threshold covers 90 to 95%, meaning if shit goes down, you'll get past it. It doesn't mean shit can go down forever and nothing can stop you. You're not Elon Musk, right? But if a major thing happens, I can digest it. That last tier, I said it was 2 million, but you can call it 5 million, whatever your number is, where your money makes enough money that you'll never starve, okay? And I use that word. I don't use you live so well. That's amorphous.
Sure.
You'll never starve, okay? So let's say that your expenses, again, it depends on what part of the world you're in, but are $8,000 a month. I'm just making up a number, right? And that includes a mortgage. It includes maybe some car payments, some student loan, depending on who you are, food, whatever. At that point, if you have $1 million earning 8%, it's not enough to cover everything, but it offsets a huge portion of that for life, at which point your delta for how much you have to make up to eat ain't that much, right? It gives you the ability, it gives you some time to scale back down, right? If you need to. I think that's important. And again, these life-changing amounts are way smaller than what people think. And the people, Ed, that I think don't understand how life-changing those are people who've never made that money. That's always the thing.
This is a good time to talk about a concept that I've often wrestled with. And I think, Will, you naturally figured it out by having that internal dialogue. It's something called the hedonic treadmill, right? And for those of you introduced concept, it's this hedonic adaptation, meaning that we have a tendency to go back to a baseline of happiness no matter what happens. 100%. And the reason that screws us up is no matter what type of highs, let's say you have a $1 billion exit. This is the reason people end up miserable. It does not matter. And what happens is if you can figure out how to break it by looking at those tiers, just like Will said, say, all right, $20,000, what's my baseline? And can I appreciate it and enjoy it? And then you move up and you just add $200,000, which is very achievable, especially if you're in startups and you hang out with us at Startups.com. We can help you with this. But that way, you're not in this sort of really weird reality where you're pumping yourself up and then you're disappointed and you're going back and forth. And that's what we coach a lot of founders with is like, hey, there's a time to enjoy and understand your baselines. And these massive exits, they're not going to make you happy, which is what a lot of people think is that I'm going to make the money first and then I'm going to be happy. But they don't realize actually you got to be happy first to be able to perform to make that money, or else you're not going to even enjoy it in the first place.
I've seen countless founders make amazing amounts of money, and almost consistently they're always disappointed. And when I say that, everyone that hears it, their first reaction is this: well, F those people, right? Like I don't feel bad for you for a second with all your money, okay? That's not my point. I'm not saying you should feel bad for them. What I'm saying is what happens when you don't have cash at any level, I don't care what your income level is, when you don't have cash is you say to yourself, my problems are because of cash. Okay. So I'm fighting with my spouse because we don't have enough cash to pay bills all the time. Okay. Or I'm not happy with my career or my self-confidence because I don't make enough money. You name it, right? All of these things feel totally valid. What messes with you when you have all that money is you don't feel any different. You realize that money was a mask to those problems, right? And when you take that off the table and say, okay, money's not an issue anymore. How are you doing? You're like, damn, not that well. Money gives you a very convenient excuse to be unhappy about something because you very clearly don't have it. The challenge is when you do get it, does that problem go away? No, you're still the insecure douchebag you were before, right? You just have a lot of money now, right? It's wild. And to be fair, it's a massive luxury to ever even get to that reasoning. And 100% of people do not believe that that's true. If I just had the money, everything would be fine. I'm different. No, you're not. You're exactly like everybody else. And when you get the money, you're going to find out.
Okay, but let's apply this, Will, to the founder who's planning the startup, and let's tie in what we talked about bootstrapping, because I think you brought up some very salient points. A founder's there, I'm going to plan this, and now I need to raise money, and I need to go for $1 billion exit because I'm going to take VC. You have made your life infinitely harder to get to those steps versus, hey, what if you just sat with Will, got on some office hours with him, let him lead you through this exercise, and you said, hey, if I optimize for a $200,000 exit, or I just made enough that I could put $20K away in net cash in the bank. Now the pressure is so much lower. It's so much easier to get there than all the hell founders put themselves through. And we watch this every day, Will, at Startups.com.
Right. What I want you to do is I want you to build your career and your startup in tiny milestones. I want you to think about it like a video game for those of you that are gamers. I want to know all your chapter save points. Okay? In a video game, as you're playing through each level, your game saves so that you don't have to go backward. But it saves at micro levels. You don't just play the game to the end and you get your ass kicked by the final boss and you have to start all over again. You have these chapter saves along the way, okay? And the chapter saves, which in this case are a financial milestone that you get to, 10K MRR a month, 20K in the bank, etc. That allows you to then be able to say, okay, I'm just focused on the competition of this level, of getting to this level. Now, when I get to that level, when I get to that chapter save point, I'm past level 1, I'm on level 2, I keep moving. I move the stake. I say that, okay, now I'm going to try to get to this next level, to 20K MRR a month or 200K, whatever my number is. But what I tell people, and what I've done myself very successfully, I've kept my milestones very small, very tight, because I want to make it through each level. I don't want to be in a position where the only way to win this game is to not die the entire time and beat the final boss, beating the IPO, etc. And that's the only way I win the game. That is idiotic. That makes no sense. And you will likely fail. And so I try to get people off of that path.
I always tell people, Will, that if you and we weren't doing startup advisory, I'd say, let's go start a self-help, personal development, motivational company with life coaching. Man, we would have that on lock, Will. I appreciate the wisdom. It's a good reminder. Great conversation, everyone, to have.
Yep.
Let's talk about this next one here. And these all tie together in terms of the exits, how much money we have to raise. You just touched on it right now. The upside of pursuing a small market. And let me couch this. And we talk about this. We acknowledge that if you're raising VC, you better have a market with B's or T's behind it. But let's go the other side. Let's steel man the other side of this and say, what is the upside of targeting and pursuing a small market?
Kind of like we've been saying in questions in previous episodes, the beauty of pursuing a small market isn't that that's the end. If I were to say, Ed, you and I are going to start a software company and we're only going to sell our products in Calgary, okay? And everyone's like, wait, why would you limit yourselves to Calgary? It's like, no, dude, that's not what we're doing. We're focusing on Calgary. And when we exhaust that market, we'll open up another market somewhere else. I mean, obviously, nobody knows what cities are in Canada, but we'd figure that out. That was a dig at Canada.
Moose Jaw. We're selling the Moose Jaw next, Will.
Anyway, but what I want to be able to do, right? I want to be able to focus on the smallest, tightest market that I can wrap my arms around, that I can absolutely dominate, okay? And then go to the next one. Okay, that could be geographically, I could be going city to city, whatever. It could be a certain user type that I'm going after. And after I get to them, I'm going to go to somewhere else. The reason I say that is because I would rather have a lot of control, right, and certainty around a small market than no control and just be totally swept up trying to go after a big market that I can't wrap my arms around or get any recognition in. You know what I mean?
Not to mention, it's much easier to learn in that smaller market, create a system, and figure out how to replicate it versus going out and, they use that expression, boiling an ocean. And it's just so much energy.
Exactly.
So, if you could dominate, I think it's important. I'm not just targeting a small market because I want to think small, stay small. I'm targeting that small market because I want to dominate. I want to be the monopoly in that small market.
And let's build on that. Let's say again, Ed, you and I are starting something new, and we're going to go after one particular market. Let's stick with Calgary, okay? We feel like for whatever our product is, that we have a very good market in Calgary to get started, okay? There might be a version where we become the kings of Calgary, right? Like we make so much money in Calgary that we don't have to go any further. Now, some people will say, "Oh, well, you're being small-minded about it." Maybe. Right? There are plenty of people who make an ungodly amount of money. Let me give you an example. I'm in Columbus, Ohio. Okay. There is a local newspaper in Columbus, Ohio called the Columbus Dispatch. Now, the Columbus Dispatch has been in the Wolf family for generations. Okay. At one point, this is like early 2000s or late 90s, early 2000s, right? I would say probably print media, a newspaper was at its peak, right? It was about to lose, right? Because, the internet was coming, but it was at its peak. At that time, I have it on good authority that the Wolf family was making $50 million a year net on that business.
Nice.
For decades. Okay? Now, let's stick with that for a second. In Columbus, Ohio. In other words, their paper didn't sell anywhere else. They didn't also sell in Cincinnati or Cleveland, being maybe even bigger markets in the state of Ohio. In just Columbus, Ohio. They dominated that market. If you were going to run a classified ad, you ran it in the Dispatch. If you were an auto dealer, you ran it in the Dispatch. Anything you would do, you ran it in the Dispatch. That worked out. They literally made billions of dollars, right? Without ever leaving a 20 square mile radius, okay? And there are lots of businesses like this, service providers, et cetera, that crush in a single market. So I just want to point out that the idea that we're being small-minded by starting in a small market is silly. No, we're being strategic by going in a small market so we can make sure we extract the value before we grow.
And before founders sort of get caught up on us talking about Calgary, Columbus, Moose Jaw, whatever, it's not just about geographical location. It could be a very thin sliver of a certain vertical, a niche of a niche. They say, well, the riches are in the niches. And let me use my social media experience, being a YouTuber, for an example. We have these YouTubers out there like Mr. Beast, right? Massive market. We need like 40 million subscribers, and everyone's like, I want to be Mr. Beast. I know this one YouTuber, and she creates content for specifically Japanese business people who want to learn English. That's it. The vocabulary, all those things. And she knows it. And she has like maybe 200-300 subscribers, but because she's selling to such a niche, she's known for it. She found product market fit faster. She doesn't need it anymore. She is so busy, and people would kill. And she doesn't have to break her back making all these YouTube videos and just feeding the algorithm, all that stuff. And so dominated a small market, got to product market fit easy, and it hit the lifestyle that she wanted. Now, truth be told, she could expand to any other culture now that she knows the system, but she's like, nah, I'm good.
I had this conversation of all people with my eye doctor, guy that does LASIK, right? This is a local guy, okay? And we get into it, and I love talking to founders because you talk to a million founders, you get a million stories. He explains to me, and he's very open about it, which I thought was very cool. His business does $5 million in revenue, doing LASIK surgeries in Columbus, Ohio, on about $2.5 million in net. $5 million in revenue on $2.5 million, and he's not even in every part of this town. He's on the north part of this town, okay? When he goes on vacation around the country, this is the coolest thing. He and his wife fly their own jet. They both have pilot licenses. They own a jet. They fly their own jet to vacation, okay? This guy never left like a 5 square mile radius of his market. And he owns the company, or he owns the business. It's a great business. I say this to say, you don't, yes, maybe he could have made this like national or international. Didn't need to. That's the point, right? This guy didn't have to go more than 10 miles to fly his own goddamn jet. And I think these small markets are wildly powerful. And again, they're a stepping stone. You get on first base. First base might be enough.
Let's compare this or relate this to founders raising money and the investor's perspective. Well, I can tell you a story. This literally happened during one of our cohort meetings, group advisory, having conversations with founder, hanging out, talking. A founder says, I approached a VC and they looked at my market sizing and they said, it's too small. It's not $1 billion business. We don't want to invest. And so now he's trying to figure out how to expand and say, how do I do that? When I go, okay, I'm going to help you with that because he wants to go raise VC money. But inside, I did the calculation and I'm like, dude, you will literally make $20-30 million a year just focusing where you are. Who cares? Figure out another way. But Will, it's this whole thing because we go back and we're saying, I'm going to repeat this just in case someone was watching this clip. Investors have different needs and unit economics targets, and they need you to go to that big market. Some investors say, if there's not $1 trillion number at the end of this market, I'm not even going to bat an eyelash to it. And you know how hard that is because they need that big exit.
Yeah, right. At that point, when we're talking about big markets, when people come to us, Ed, and they say, hey, how's my pitch deck look? My market size, is it big enough? We tell them it does need to be big enough. Like, to your point, it's got to have B's and T's, okay? However, that's if you want to build a business for them, right? That has nothing to do if you want to build a business for you, right? You could build a business that does $3 million a year on $1.5 million net and literally live like a king, right? Especially depending on where you decide to live. One of the second businesses that I built back in the day after we had grown this agency and sold it was a very small niche business. It's a business some people have heard of called swapalease.com, okay? As niche as it gets. It's this site where you can list your car, like put your car lease up there, and someone else can come and assume your lease and kind of take it off your hand. It's a great deal for both of you. This is like circa 2000, Ed, where like online classifieds and marketplaces are still very young, okay? Within the first 18 to 24 months of launching this thing, it's doing $3 million on $1.5 million net. And I'm thinking to myself, we're only 2 years into this thing. I'm the most niche business on the most esoteric part of the internet at a time long before like cost per click really became a thing or growth marketing. I mean, it's kind of how we got into this. But my point is, I was like, this works out pretty well. Like, why don't I go do this again? And I did. I built another business right after that. In 24 months, we were doing $3 million revenue on $1.5 million net, right? And I'm like, damn, like it took so much. It would take so much for me to get that personal outcome in a funded business. And yet I was able to do it in 24 months, twice, back to back with super niche businesses. I'm not saying it's easy. I'm saying those are tiny markets that pay off amazing.
It's easier, relatively speaking.
Sure. Probability's higher.
Let's get down to brass tacks and talk about exits. We've been sort of riffing on this.
Yeah.
So business A tries to sell to everybody and maybe gets 10% market penetration and tries to go sell. Makes more money, gross, but has only hit 10% of the market. Business B makes less money, but has 90% domination in a smaller market. Hands down, you can go talk to anybody buying, selling businesses. Business B is going to sell at a better price than business A. And that's a reality. You can fact check us on this.
Well, how about this? The coolest thing about business B, they don't have to sell at all. That's the whole point.
Which is the reason the price goes up, Will.
Yeah. No, that's what I'm saying. But I'm saying that local newspaper that's like printing, it's funny, printing $50 million a year net, or my eye doctor that's doing 2.5 million. What I'm saying is, eye doctor, he didn't have to sell a goddamn thing. He already won, right? The idea is that we have to grow this thing to sell it to get our proceeds. What I'm saying is, take swapalease.com. That made the proceeds in 24 months. We didn't have to sell anything. We already won. We already had the money that selling would have otherwise given us. That's what I'm trying to get at.
I know a hardware founder, hard tech guy, and came up with this real cool invention and had to do with electronics. And he really focused. He said no. He said, I want to know what my no's are before I know what I say yes to, right? So he managed his business. He told me, he says, Ed, I haven't had to lay anybody off in 20 years. And I was like, that's amazing. And then, by the end of it, he gave his company away. He converted it into a cooperative. And I remember because he built this Monopoly game to teach people how to play Monopoly and learn how to be an owner. And everybody who works for him gets to be an owner. What an amazing feeling. And he's like, Ed, I don't need any of that money. I'm just going to give the company away to the people who've helped build it. There's legacy involved. He spends time with his family. Well, that's a dream for everybody.
It helps if you've made a ton of money for 20 years too, right? Like if you banked so much cash that it actually starts to not matter anymore, you get to do cool shit like that. You get to do like all these amazing like charitable things. The point is, you don't have to sell for $1 billion to get there. There are a million routes, literally a million routes to being able to make life-changing money without having a 1 in a million outcome, without having a lottery ticket outcome.
That's just amazing. Like these conversations, well, founders don't get to have these conversations.
Not enough.
It's just a place, and I want to end with this and just have a shout out for everybody. I think I speak for Will when I say we are good if you want to have these types of conversations with us. Like, nothing is off limits, I don't think, Will. Do you have any boundaries when it comes to what founders ask you?
Zero.
You know, so we're experiencing that every single day. And that's what I love about Startups.com, Will. And this is a shout out to you and what you and Ryan Rattan did with Startup Therapy Podcast. You made it so approachable, talking about the things that I didn't hear other people talking about. And I said, man, it's so refreshing to be in a community that talks about this.
I agree. And just to like, it's kind of back to sanity, right? Because a lot of the stuff that we talk about, like, we help people raise big sums of money all the time, right? So this isn't us being anti VC or IPO. I'm all for it. I'm just pragmatic. I'm like, I just care about your outcome as the founder. I don't care about an investor's outcome. So when you tell me I'm going to bet everything to make an investor a ton of money, I'm like, okay, do you have to? Because you might not. And so I want to make sure, and Ed, I know you feel the same way, that we are optimizing for a founder's outcome. And we're showing them as many paths as possible to getting to an outcome that'll be life-changing for them. Fundraising just happens to be one of them. And we'll help you out with whatever direction you want to go, but let's lay them all out.
And I'm going to use this opportunity to do a shameless plug because I don't think a lot of founders understand how we're built different, Will. We're not investing in these founders. We don't have investors that we have to make happy ourselves. Right. And that's the best part about Startups.com. Like, we're not beholden to investors. We're bootstrapped all the way. Nope. And that, Will, gives you and me the freedom to do exactly what you said with integrity, make it all about the founder.
Yep.
What's your last word? I'm going to leave it to you.
My last word is, look, there's a million ways to make millions, okay? Raising is one, but what's important here, what's important for all the founders that are listening to this, and some of them are even skeptical, even after we've laid all these things out there, a little bit skeptical, which you should be. I want you to remember, your thresholds for what you need to make that are life-changing for you are very achievable. They are, but not if you make them too big. Not if you push them too far away. You create milestones that put you in a all success or all failure position. You just don't have to be. Build a plan that gets you on base, then get to the next base and get to the next base, and make sure that you just keep getting on base. That's how you win more often.
Will, I'm tempted to make this episode that we put in the can mandatory listening for every founder. I think that's how important this topic is. And
I love it.
I appreciate being able to talk about it. For everybody who is going to be watching us, who's part of Startups.com, it is our turn to return the gratitude to you. We are so grateful. You make our worlds go around, help us get up every single day. We are here every Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. Like I said, Tuesdays we do pitch decks. Wednesdays we do traction hacking, revenue acceleration. Make sure you check us out. And once again, do the YouTube thing, like, comment, subscribe. Let us know what you're thinking. Share it with another founder. And thanks again, Will. I'll see you next week.
It was great. Take care, everybody. Bye now.